Hello, part 5 of question mark. I hope I'm wrapping it up soon. So that's how it began. Then it sparked my curiosity. What's really behind all this? So 15 years later, I went to graduate school for 3 years and did this 351-page independent study and learned exactly what happened here, because a lot of federal documents were recently declassified in the 90s that explained a lot about and so you can see this study at the Siegel Museum with a preface about the thesis of the concept of dispersal that led to urban renewal in America, and it began in 1946, and that's why from 46 to 76, almost 3/4 of Easton was demolished as part of this federal initiative. Now, how much time do I have left? I can't tell. So I arrived, and that's how I got everything started. But as I say, I started getting a lot of death threats and so on. And coincidentally, more serendipity, I met my husband, Earl, 43 years ago. A few months later in Easton, began our life here. And we realized we hadn't moved to New York City right away if we were going to survive not just these death threats, but also the lethal myth of supremacist ideology that said he and I are inferior and heterosexuals are superior to our love, and we can't be honest about our love unless we live in a ghetto where it's not a heterosexual ghetto, it's a gay ghetto, and that was New York City. So we moved there so we could be honest, and he became very involved, as did I, with starting to fight for the civil rights of our rainbow tribe. Many people ask, is this a rainbow scarf? No, this is a Frank Lloyd Wright designed scarf from paint samples that he liked in the 50s. And I got it at the Museum of Modern Art, but I like wearing it because like myself, it's very dual. I'm a Gemini, and so was my late twin sister, the sign of the twin. And I always like things that have a duality about them. So check out the oral history about this graduate study, which I will focus on the graduate study only. And then I'll also talk briefly about my subsequent career after all this happened. But this graduate study I did in the 90s took 3 years, and I got a master's in history, magna summa cum laude, and I loved it. It satisfied my curiosity, but it was very depressing to find out how much money and effort and federal and the heartbreaking stories that the museum and the Historical Society unearthed in my research and at the Marx Room at the Easton Library are these heartbreaking stories of the thousands of people who tried to stop all this in the 1940s and 50s, and they lost at the state Supreme Court of Pennsylvania, and they gave up, and they were all evicted, 30 days notice, sometimes 15 days notice, and the city was just destroyed, most of it, well, 2/3, let's say. And how can you take the heart and soul and rip it out of a city or a community? Everybody out, no recourse, no notice, goodbye, and nowhere to go. The suburbs didn't quite exist yet. So where's everyone supposed to go? And these were prominent business owners, very wealthy people that had, a lot of them, that this was their ancestral homes downtown, and goodbye, didn't matter, because it was in a sense a pilot project for the federal government that if this, part of their strategy, if this can get everyone out of a city before the Soviet Union acquires the atomic bomb to destroy American cities by 1954, then it's a civil defense initiative, and that's what it became. Led by no other than the chairperson, the Secretary of Defense, eventually, who was in the 50s, appointed by Eisenhower, I believe, who was none other than the CEO of General Motors, the largest corporation in the world by far. And this study gets into all that, so it's very compelling and very depressing. But in the meantime, I moved to New York. So I finished my internship, my apprenticeship with architectural firms, got licensed. And then I took a sabbatical and I worked for large nonprofit corporations and humanitarian organizations for some time. I considered it like a volunteering or a spending my time making the world a better place in non-architectural ways, such as the United Nations, the UNICEF, the U.S. Committee for UNICEF, a ministry to the isolated elderly in Manhattan, the Office for Church and Society, which was a social justice branch of the United Church of Christ, where my husband worked at the headquarters in Manhattan at the time. They've since moved to Ohio. So I really enjoyed, while I pursued an architectural art career of doing paintings and more sketching and even books, I think, and exploring the art museums in New York City. I worked part-time so I could do all this and still get benefits, health insurance and so on, because this wasn't Australia anymore. And so that's how I spent my time from 1978, when I got licensed, until I went to graduate school in 1992, I believe it was, when I was back in Easton, although we were living in New Hope while Earl was retraining to become a hospital chaplain. So we moved down there while he was training in Philadelphia and getting yet more education. And I was enrolled in a graduate program who would tailor the program to this independent study of Easton, and I ran it by them, and I finally found a graduate school university who would do that, and it was East Stroudsburg University. Even though I did all my research at Princeton and Lehigh University and all these other libraries where I found everything I needed, but including the Marx history room at the Easton Public Library. And the cornerstone was Jane Moyer's, the librarian, late great Jane Moyer, wrote a Bale's scrapbook of all this thick, clippings of what people tried to do to stop this destruction of their city. It was heartbreaking. That became the cornerstone. It's a must-read. So then I got involved in all that. Then I also worked during this time with a Big 8 accounting firm in Manhattan, in Rockefeller Center at the time, the biggest of the Big 8, as an in-house interior designer for their 10 floors in what was the Exxon building at the time. And I really enjoyed that. And I commuted from New York while I did that, and Earl and I then got into developing historic properties here in Easton. We'd buy only condemned buildings. We didn't want to get into gentrification. And buildings that were vacant for maybe 20 years. And we would pretty much gut them and did a quick cosmetic fix, only cosmetics, and then sell them. We didn't want to become landlords. We were too busy commuting. So that was a way of saving these buildings and land banking them until buyers might come along who would appreciate these buildings, and that's come to pass. We bought our first house during this time in 81, and our second, the home I'm in now, in 84 we bought this. Never planning to live here, but it was the worst house in the county, so it wouldn't sell, even no matter what quick cosmetic fixes we did. So we said, well, let's invest in it and make this our home, and that's what we did. Now I can see I'm going to probably run out of time. I can't tell with this, but sorry. It's so primitive. I need an assistant, an audio-visual assistant here. I also worked to save Grand Central Station from demolition with the Committee to Save Grand Central, led by the Municipal Art Society, and the chairperson of the committee was Jackie Onassis, and she hired a train to go to Washington back in the 70s to stop the demolition, and I helped there, volunteered there to man a storefront near the Oyster Bar to get signatures and to get organized and to help and it was successful. We saved Grand Central Station. It was too late for Penn Station. That was before my time. In fact, people used to say to me, well, where were you in Easton when the McDonald's came in? Why didn't you try to stop that? I said, well, I was in 10th grade in Harrisburg. But more importantly, where were you? And what did you do to try to stop it? I said this sort of snidely before I learned that everyone in Easton tried to stop this disaster, and they all took it to the state Supreme Court, and they failed utterly because things were federally classified. They didn't have to tell them why. So they tried and failed. Now, so I became involved in the organization like Historic Easton Incorporated and stuff. I volunteered to help save the State Theater, which was going to be a parking lot, to do sketches to raise, for their opening, to raise money, the Bachman House Tavern, which is now a beautiful museum owned by the Siegel, the Northampton County Historical Society. I chaired the first house tour that included downtown Easton. It was called the College Hill House Tour, and people would say, how do you get from College Hill to 8 downtown? I said, well, how do people get there now? Why don't we have a trolley, a horse-drawn trolley or something? And that was the most successful house tour to date, and that was 1984. And it included downtown buildings. I was on the mayor at the time was Sal Panto, who's mayor again, the Arts Commission of 17 people who worked tirelessly to make Easton a creative community and attract artists to New York City. There were about 10 artists from New York City, about 10 artists from Soho ended up here through those efforts. That wasn't my particular committee, but I worked with that commission and was appointed to that with others like the late, great Carl Sterner. And this really turned Easton around back in 1983. Not 1883. I was president of the Community Art League. Did I mention that? We had a building near the library that then has since been sold to a nonprofit, but a religious organization. But it was a wonderful facility, and they elected me president, and we had great ideas. But Easton at the time was going through a pretty bad time with the economics of everything. So that didn't last too long. The Perkins controversy, I was very involved in that, getting that proposed building that was a suburban footprint to be moved to the sidewalk, real materials, not orange enameled junk, and it worked. Now it's demolished where the new City Hall is, which was designed by a wonderful firm. It's modernist, which I like. I like modernism when mixed in with using good materials, mixed in with historic architecture. Well, all this, and I had an atelier, I had an artist studio in the ballroom of the Able Mansion above what is today River Grill Restaurant in the Able Mansion that was magnificent. And I had an art exhibition there and planned to stay, but then the building got sold and beautifully converted into its current use. I had a hair salon, I called it, H-A-R-E, not H-A-I-R, on Spring Garden Street for a year in 2012. Refer to the Northampton County oral history once it's existing to see more about any of this stuff. I did another big art exhibition called Duality, where I went into the duality of Easton and New York Easton. And that was launched on the 25th anniversary of my husband and my marriage, we considered it. And that was a lot of fun. However, 9/11 happened, and every image contained the Twin Towers looking like they're being bombed and destroyed and with glittering glaze and all. It was like a prescient. It's like I completed all these within 5 years prior to 9/11, and everyone thought, because this opened in October of 2001, and they thought this was my response to 9/11. No, 9/11 hadn't happened yet. So life followed art in that sense. Well, did I mention the biggest pinnacle of my architectural career began in 2007 until 2009. 12 years I worked at the Capitol as the state architect for 500 school districts in Pennsylvania, and would work with the architects and school district officials to build safer and better schools, and I loved that. And I had a secondary residence in Harrisburg during that time, but I retired from there 10 years ago in April. So time flies. I'm going to wrap up, I think. I have a feeling I've been yakking too long. I don't know what the time limit is on this phone. I'm running out of battery and everything else. But I retired April 25th, 2009, back to Easton full-time. I've been here holidays, vacations, and weekends that we weren't in New York City nearby, but we just love, and Errol and I have worked tirelessly to win the freedom to marry, and we got that at midnight on July 21st, 2015. And we have marched in that New York City Heritage of Pride March for 40 years. Until last year was our 40th year. We said, that's it, we're hanging up our marching shoes, and we won the freedom to marry permanently in every American state and territory, thanks to the work of ourselves and countless other people. Thank you. And President Obama, who advocated to the Supreme Court to make these rulings. We would see if any of that would have happened today, but it's almost too late. It's permanent. What else? That's it. I'm now, my purpose, my hobby, my goal, my life is simply enjoying the rewards, well-earned, of this 45-year career that took me around the world. It was like a magic carpet ride. I was very fortunate. It had its ups and downs, certainly, with the economy usually, but I'm so grateful that as a small child in my hometown of Harrisburg, and this is our family room with pictures of my mother and my grandparents and my grandfather, who really was my first father until I was 11 when my mother finally remarried a wonderful man, Mr. Lehman, who became a truly devoted father to her and husband to her and father to us three teenagers, almost adolescents, out of control. Poor guy. He passed away in 1980 in Florida, wintering in Florida. He had been retired 1 year, I believe, not even one full year. It was really sad. Unexpectedly, he died in perfect health, it seemed, until we saw the results of the autopsies, and he was spared a really awful death by waking up dead. That's the way to go, and I hope the same for me. I'm not concerned about dying because as a secular humanitarian, I feel my life is simply between oblivions. I was obliviated before I showed up. I'll be obliviated sometime soon at 70, pushing 72. I don't think I have too much longer to think about it. But all of my ancestors are dearly departed, and Earl's too. We're orphaned. We've seen them all come and go. We've had wonderful childhoods, wonderful lives. And the same will happen to us. We won't be here anymore. So I'm so grateful that the Siegel Museum wants to do an oral history about this graduate study, especially. That's what it's going to be hopefully focusing on. And then this could be an adjunct to it. The link to this playlist of videos will be an adjunct to that study. Either a preface or an epilogue, it doesn't matter. But my whole career with that sandwiched in between. And did I mention I've done photography, I've done all kinds of other things that I don't have time to get into. But this has just been my career, and I'm enjoying the rewards now of everything I've done to watch Easton thrive. Boom. I think our current leadership is phenomenal, and that's what it takes. That's what it always takes. And I always focus on the positive and what I'm grateful for. Yes, I'll get in there and fight like mad to beat people if they're doing the wrong thing or if they're being wrong, and if I know I'm right regarding the advocacy of not just civil rights, but preservation of historic buildings and so on and so on. And if that gets me I make a lot of enemies, let's just start there. And not just where you would expect. Oftentimes, amongst the people that are also trying to do the right thing, but they find my approach maybe a little more brusque or urgent. I don't have time to waste, I never did. And I don't intend to waste a minute. And both Earl and I, we have that much in common. We're both fierce people. We suffer fools badly. And that can make us a lot of enemies, guilty as charged. But our heart is in the right place. And we try to be kind. And we try to use gratitude as our guiding principle for what's right, what's humane, what's inhumane. And if it's humane, we're with it. If it's inhumane, count us out. And we'll fight tooth and nail to save our democracy, to save our city, to do whatever it takes. And we will go down fighting, no doubt, in this world. Thanks for listening.